Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where it's a very beautiful day here at the park. I just finished my lunch, and after finishing my lunch I took a walk through the park and enjoyed the view of these beautiful fish kites, as they were called when I was a kid, but here in Japan they are called koi nobori. Koi is the Japanese word for carp, and nobori means to go up, so that kind of gives you an idea of what they are, just the carp which goes up. These are a symbol of the first week of May, which is known as, I guess, the time of the Children's Festival, which is held every year. It wasn't that long ago when it was known as Boys' Day, but in order to become more inclusive, they kind of changed the name here, though they do still have a Girls' Festival back in March. In addition to the beautiful display of the Koi Nobori, nearby we have the big lawn at the park, and they have set up a pretty interesting children's play area, sponsored by, I guess, the Goldwyn Company, which is an outdoor goods maker, outdoor wear, camping, and stuff like that. I believe they own North Face as well as another brand, which is you may know of. Every year, or I guess several times a year, they set up interesting things here at the park for kids to go and play and enjoy. And there are also things set up here for adults and whatever. It's really nice to be able to see these displays being put up once again. We haven't had so many of them over the last couple of years for obvious reasons. We're hoping that 2022 is going to be a more normal year, and with any luck we'll be able to resume the summer festivals this year. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started with the subject of today's video. And today I'm going to be talking about a camera which I mentioned a couple videos ago. This one is going to be about the Yashica Half 14, which is a half frame camera which was produced by Yashica, I think 1965, 1966, making it one of the later models of Yashica's half frame series of cameras. The Half 14 was an improved version of the Half 17, and what they did is they added a faster, more sophisticated lens. Instead of the f1.7 lens in the Half 17, they put in a 32mm f1.4 lens, which was a 6-element lens. And this was the fastest lens you could get in a fixed lens half frame format camera. The only lens which was faster was the interchangeable lens which was fitted into the Olympus F series of SLR cameras, the famous 40mm f1.2, which was quite popular with people who like micro four thirds digital photography. But the next best lens in the lot was, of course, this Yashica DX 32mm f1.4. This camera features a CDS light meter. It's kind of an improvement over the selenium light meter in the earlier camera. It's battery powered and originally used the old Mercury MR9 1.3 volt battery, but you can use this camera with a 625 alkaline battery. Works just fine with one of those. This uses the small battery mainly because it doesn't have an electronic shutter like the Yashica Electro 35 series or the Electro Half, which I did a review about earlier. This camera featured an operating system similar to the Olympus Trip 35 series. And what happens is, as the light varies on the meter, there's a meter needle inside the camera which moves from left to right. And there's kind of a step linkage. And when you depress the button, or shutter button, depending on where the needle is when the step linkage comes down upon it, that's how the camera sets its exposure. It's quite a simple system, fully mechanical, and doesn't require any excess of electronics. Unfortunately, it's not as accurate as the electronic brain which Yashica used in their Electro 35 cameras, but it's still quite reasonable, and for negative film it's quite accurate. And the wonderful thing about these cameras, if you're a little bit knowledge about them, you can get them at any discrepancies in the metering system you can compensate for a little bit. A good thing about this meter system is that these CDS meters tend to age better than selenium light meters. The selenium, over time, the surface, I guess the light sensitive surface can become corroded or tarnished, and that reduces the amount of light which can touch the surface and reduces the amount of current and makes the accuracy of the meter, I guess, fall off over time or fail altogether. Now, that's not such a problem with the CDS meters. The only issue you have with these meters is that corrosion from the battery sometimes affects the electronics on the inside of the camera. So anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the features, controls, and functions of the Half 14. Starting at the top here, we have this very clean, smooth, rounded design, which makes this camera very good for carrying in a coat pocket. All we have here is a shoe for mounting a flash gun. We have the shutter release button, which accepts a standard cable release. This one doesn't have a lock switch like some of the other electro half cameras or half series cameras do. Mainly because this camera, you have to push in the shutter button a fair amount more, and I think that's kind of a built-in safety feature without having to add another mechanism to it. Works quite well. Over here we have the frame counter window, which runs up to 72 exposures, which you can get from a 36 exposure roll of film. If you're shooting a 24 exposure roll of film, you can expect 48 exposures. You know, just whatever the number is written on the film, you can expect double that when you're using a half frame camera. On the back here we have the viewfinder eyepiece, and despite its small size, this camera features a very wonderful viewfinder. It copies the design of the original Olympus Pen F, which used projected frame lines, which allows you to get a very good and bright system for composing when you're shooting the camera. And the good thing about the Yashicas is they have a very high quality beam splitting mirror inside, which seldom suffers from deterioration. And it gives you a really good rangefinder image, or viewfinder image, like you would get in the bigger Electro 35 cameras. On the rest of the back here we don't have anything except for the film winding and shutter charging dial on the bottom, and this you would operate with your left hand, leaving your right hand of course free to actuate the shutter button. It doesn't take much of a turn to wind from frame to frame here, as this is a half frame format camera. You don't need to wind it, you only have to wind it half as far as you would with an ordinary 35mm camera. Quite simple. On the bottom of the camera we have a few more things here. We have the release button for the winding mechanism, so you can rewind the film. We have a standard 1/4" tripod socket. Here we have the battery cap over the battery chamber. An odd thing about these cameras is the polarity is reversed what it is compared to a normal Yashica camera. Most Yashica cameras have kind of, I guess, a positive ground, so the positive end of the battery faces toward the battery cap. This camera, when I first got it, I scratched my head a little bit because the battery wasn't fitting, and then I realized that it's a negative ground camera, so you have to turn the battery around and put it upside down compared to how you would put it in most film cameras of this era. Over here we have the film rewind button or dial, the exact same thing you find on some of the bigger Yashica Electro 35 cameras. On this side here we have the tab which you pull down to open the film door. This camera is still quite dirty on the inside. I haven't had a chance to clean it yet. It just came in the mail yesterday. We have the take-up spool here. We have the take-up sprocket here, and this is the film chamber where you put in your film cartridge. If you're loading the film, you just drop it in here and slide it backward. Pull your film across, feed it into the take-up spool, and you can simply wind it. This one's a little bit sticky because I said I haven't worked on it yet. It has a few other issues which I'm trying to work out. I know I mentioned in my past video, and to some people who've inquired about these cameras, that I would be listing these for sale soon. I'd hope to be able to list this one right away, but as I look at it now, it needs a fair amount of work, and the most obvious work this needs is, I can see that the lens is distorted here a little bit. It's pointing down a little bit, so I have to realign the base of the lens to get it square again. And because it's misaligned, though the light meter in this camera works, the linkage for the shutter mechanism is binding. So I've got to get that apart and all that, and at the moment I'm not sure if it's actually worth the trouble to try to go through this camera and get it into working condition and list it again. I don't sell cameras for a lot of money. I try to be very reasonable, but since I sell cameras for a fairly reasonable price, I try not to get cameras which I have to invest a lot of time and effort to get them going again. But anyway, let's go ahead and move to the front of the camera here. We have a very minimalist design on the front. We have the focusing ring located here on the back, which has scales arranged in meters and feet. We have the aperture ring and control ring here. We have an auto setting for operating the camera in the auto mode. We have a bulb setting, which is a really wonderful thing to have on these old cameras. And then we have a set of aperture settings. And this camera is somewhat of an aperture priority camera. And it actually has the same range of shutter speeds, at least the faster speeds that we'd find on the Electro 35 camera, up to 1/500th of a second. But it doesn't have the slower electronically controlled shutter speeds of the Electro 35. An Electro 35 shutter will stay open as long as a minute, sometimes longer. Your mileage varies depending on which particular one you have. But this one here is limited down to about a 30th of a second or so. Quite enough range for general photography. On the very front here we have the light meter cell here for the CDS light meter. On the bottom here we have a window showing the film speed setting, and then we have a dial here which you turn around the lens to adjust the film speed. So when you load the film in the camera, you set the number in the bottom window here to match what you have loaded in the camera, and it's ready to go. Inside the viewfinder we have a match needle system showing a range of shutter speeds, and when you're operating the camera, when you depress the shutter halfway, it will lock the shutter and the needle will show you what shutter speed the camera is going to select when it operates. And there's of course an over and under range on the top and bottom to let you know if there is too much or not enough light to make an accurate exposure. So a pretty good system. Very similar, as I said, to the Olympus Trip 35 and other cameras, except with a really wonderful lens. I really like the Trip 35 camera because of it's a full frame 35mm format camera. The only drawback is it's very simple, I guess, D Zuiko 4-element lens. This camera has a much more sophisticated lens and is a really good performer. Last thing, self-timer is located on this side, and with this camera I recommend not using the self-timer. This one has a very fragile self-timer, even worse than the ones which come on the regular Electro 35 cameras. Luckily it's in a good location where it's very difficult to trip it accidentally or jam it. So that's pretty much it for this camera. If you're a collector of Yashica cameras, the half 14 is really interesting because it's one of the less common Yashica cameras. If you are a half frame enthusiast who actually likes to go out and shoot with one of these cameras, this camera has a fantastic lens and you can make really incredible photographs. It's really suitable for, say, candid or street photography. The operation is quite quiet and very easy to use. It's a scale focus camera, so you can easily preset your focus. You have to be a little bit more careful with the focus in these cameras as it has a faster lens. So if you're shooting it, say, slower than, say, or faster than f5.6, say f1.4 to f5.6, you're gonna have to be more careful with how precisely you focus the lens. If you're shooting from f8 to f16, it's going to have enough depth of field to where you can more or less just set the focus ring somewhere more or less in the middle and everything will be kind of in focus. It's a pretty cool camera, and I'm really hoping I can get this one fixed up and get it out there for sale. Otherwise, I'm waiting for another one, and hopefully that one should arrive in a few days. It's kind of a shame with this one because all the things which are usually not working on these cameras are working on this one, but the things which are usually okay on these cameras are not okay on this one. So this is one of those ones which is going to be kind of a little bit of a pain. But anyway, that's it for my video about the Yashica half 14 camera. I mentioned before that I'm making more videos about more cameras. I'm trying to get as many different kinds of cameras as I can. Try to get people more interested in vintage cameras and film photography. I'm trying to get this channel to grow, of course, and by clicking the like button below the video here, that kind of helps and gets more people to come over here and check out these videos. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.